want to say that it seems kind of obvious to want to know what prognosticates a good outcome. And we rely on physical examination, history, MRI scan or imaging, and in some cases diagnostic injection. I have 10 minutes, which is not a lot of time, but I'm going to introduce to you a portfolio of articles that I published that are all about that. So think of it as an introduction because I'm going to get pretty technical here with some of the math that's behind that. The radiographic criteria that we use in our assessment on painful lesions is based on Lee's zone classification. Here's an example of it. And we assess that in both the axial and the sagittal zone. The transfemoral decompression that I do is quite aggressive. It's mostly a facetectomy beyond the scope of a simple foraminoplasty. I use chisels and unsheatheded drills and Clarissons that go straight through the working channel. This drill is high torque and low revolution, which allows you to drill continuously without clogging up the scope, and you have very little problems with whiteout. So it's an effective tool that's also very inexpensive and reusable. The staged management concept relies exactly on identifying the primary pain generator and simplifying the surgical treatment in the endoscopic spine care model. And that's obviously based on Dr. Young's experience that I'm listing here and some of the things that we've written up together. Here's an editorial about the use of MRI criteria and diagnostic injection protocols that he and I wrote together. This has also been written up in 5-year follow-up papers where it illustrates that that staged management protocol actually does work fairly reliably. What do we use as prognosticators? As I said, diagnostic injections, MRI scan criteria, and X-rays. Those are the image injection criteria. Here's an article that I published first leading up to the MRI paper that you're going to see next because it was easy to publish that. The MRI paper was so controversial that we had a hard time publishing it because no radiologist was interested in it. This article analyzes the positive predictive value of a lidocaine-containing transdermal selective nerve root block. How predictive is that of a successful outcome in performing the surgery in the same location? And we correlated that to the zone classification under directly visualized pathology here shown, and we calculated specificity and sensitivity numbers and positive predictive values numbers. And again, I don't have the time to get into it, but essentially it is a correlation between who had a positive outcome from the operation in correlation to a diagnostic injection, which was defined as 50% pain reduction minimum or more. The numbers that we were able to achieve with that show that the sensitivity of the block is actually quite high. Specificity is also fairly high in comparison to imaging criteria, which I'm going to show in a little bit. Positive predictive value, 98%. In other words, there's a 98% chance patient will improve with the transfemoral decompression if the diagnostic nerve block is diagnostic or positive. All right, here's the Pong-Dong study to that, MRI criteria, also published in Clinical Neurology Neurosurgery. As I said, very difficult to get that published. I never had that happen that a paper goes through 11 versions of revisions. 11 versions of revisions, a lot of pushback from radiologists. Using again the Lee classification here, some MRI imaging correlates in the axial and sagittal plane as to what exactly defines lateral recess and foraminal stenosis. Here's an example of an MRI report where I had concordant agreement between the radiologist reading and my assessment and the response on the diagnostic injection. Again, we used the zone classification as previously outlined. Now, what about though a patient where the MRI report does not support what you're planning to do surgically? And that poses in our world a problem with insurance authorization. Because nobody reads the physician's note, they read the MRI report by the radiology, and if there is a disagreement, it automatically translates into no surgery authorization. So it's a big problem, and that's the motivation why I wrote this up and studied it. Here's an image of a successful transfemoral decompression. Same concept, we calculated sensitivity, specificity, and again I would ask you to look at the original articles. Outcomes were the same, it's the same study group as in the injection group, but here's the amazing result. If you use MRI criteria by the radiologist, meaning if you just rely on the MRI report as a positive predictor of good outcome with the intervention, you have a false positive a negative number of 554. That's a 35% error rate. Okay? Now to clean that up some more, we use the injection, and that comes down by that protocol here driven by surgeon decision making to 224. So again, you're able to clean up the diagnostic protocol on the front end. Here. Now does that mean that these surgeries were unинdicated? And if I go back here for a minute, you saw the false negative number was 554. That's literally the question I got in the review of the paper. You never should have done these surgeries because the MI didn't support it. And the only reason why I got that published is because I had this other article already out there, and 94% of these patients had excellent good outcomes. So the proof is in the pudding. When patients have no symptoms, then that is the ultimate indicator of the indication for the surgery. So what do we really do? In lateral recess decompression, it's a supraarticular process resection. What we're trying to do with these prognosticators, replace existing image-based protocols that are just based on what the MRI scan shows in terms of what to do with the patient. Now, in terms of what is the actual detectable difference in outcome, every procedure is specific. And there's a technique that's called the RSC analysis, or minimally clinically important difference. And again, I don't have the time to get into that today, but it's clear that the VAS score is the most sensitive and accurate measure of pain improvement versus ODI and others. Now, what about the effect size? We always get criticized endoscopic surgery is too small, it's a sham operation, and formal decompression is needed to reliably result in symptom improvement. I used an agnostic analysis, 114 studies in a meta-analysis published here in IJSS. Very interesting, and we found out that there is a significant overlap of benefit. And if you look at ODI improvements, not statistically significant for ANOVA testing here, but look at the number of samples, 15,553 samples, an incredible number of data samples. Now, if you look at the effect size analysis, the pink rounded circles are the endoscopy effect size numbers. They significantly overlap with laminectomy infusion data, meaning those surgeons that reported these results were able to achieve similar results as with open surgery. So the criticism that endoscopy is ineffective was proven inaccurate with their own numbers. We just talked with Malcolm here about minimum follow-up. 2 years is often required, and we found out that that's not the case either. Yeah? The treatment effect tends to deteriorate after that period of time. Again, another indicator that vast leg pain, if you look at the p-value down below, with almost 17,000 samples here, was significant, meaning that 2-year follow-up is not always a significant predictor. Now, what's the ultimate concept or proof of superiority? Because that's the question we always get. Is it better than the old stuff, and why should I change if my old stuff does work so well? How long does a treatment benefit last? That's the ultimate predictor of that and the value in that operation. And the best way to assess that is survival analysis. In other words, what's the period of time that elapsed until the patient sought medical attention for the same problem by another provider. And we used as an example here laser versus formal decompression. And again, I don't have the time to go into the details, but it's obvious that they're totally different surgeries or interventions. And you can see that the survival of the benefit was much shorter with the laser than with the endoscopy, which had a 50% median survival rate of 58 months, almost 5 years. Okay. Now, in terms of competing with traditional spine surgeries, and most of you would agree that a laminectomy doesn't last that long, and a TLIF likely has additional follow-up interventions done as a result of adjacent segment disease and other problems. All right, I'm going to try to end my talk here, but this is all written up in a journal, 2 journal articles on the Journal of Personalized Medicine. The concept is called spine screen. Here's a comparison using that protocol on benefit with TLIF, laminectomy versus endo. Here are some images of intraoperatively visualized pain generators that escape the MRI scan. This takes this concept a little bit further, and you can see that there's a lot of authors here, and that paper was endorsed by 14 international spine societies, so it's a big consensus statement. Here's an example of Blue Cross Blue Shield medical necessity criteria for surgery, and you can see they're all image-based. There's not a single element that's on clinical judgment, experience, or diagnostic injection workup. And I'm getting to the end of my talk. I apologize if I go over a little bit, but you see here on that article, MI positive and negative pain generators. And negative almost all the time are inflamed nerve roots or inflamed annular tears. You just don't see that on the scan that reliably. If you look at facets, they're similarly problematic. Tethered nerve roots you almost never see on an MRI scan, but there are existing entities that we frequently see on an endoscopic view. The protocol is summarized here. And you can see a patient gets into the top of this whole process, gets worked up, has surgery on the bottom. The round circle basically indicates you treat the main pain generator at the time, you let the patient exit, and you restart, hopefully years later or never, with the same protocol, working up an additional pain generator if they have that. So obviously that's a simplified version of taking care of patients, but in the context of a public healthcare system where we have to take care of more patients with less resources, it makes sense. Doesn't work for everything, but it works for the majority of patients. Thank you very much.